Greetings, friends, and welcome once again to the Creation Soapbox, brought to you by your good friends here at abitoforange.com. Today we're looking at evolutionary mechanism number 3, vestigial organs and structures. So what are vestigial organs and structures? Well, according to the kids at evolution.berkeley.edu, a vestigial structure is a feature that was an adaptation for the organism's ancestor, but that evolved to be non-functional because the organism's environment changed. Take this fish, for example. This fish has no eyes. So this fish is a cave-dwelling fish. It lives in total darkness its entire life. We believe that this fish is descended from a fish that had eyes, but this fish has no eyes, which means somewhere between its eyed ancestor and now, it lost the genes for eyes, or somehow those genes were shut off. Now, some are going to claim that this is an evolutionary change because this is a beneficial change. Having lost its eyes, the fish is actually better suited to this environment. In its environment, there is no light, so having eyes does you no good. In fact, having eyes is a disadvantage in this environment because eyes are fairly soft and easily damaged, and so since they're not providing any help in avoiding collisions, if you collide with something and run into something with your eyes, it's easily damaged, easily infected, and can cost the fish its life. So in this particular environment, losing the eyes was a beneficial change. But it was not an evolutionary change because, as you remember, evolution has to account for the creation of new features, structures, functions, and behaviors. Losing one that already existed can never explain where they come from in the first place. Taking a fish and removing its eyes doesn't explain where the fish came from or even where the eyes came from. So this is not an evolutionary change. It cannot tell the evolutionary story or grow the Darwinian tree of life. The human appendix is another very common example of what's called a vestigial structure. The appendix used to be on a long list of, I think, 100 items in the human body that are said to be vestigial. They have no function. They used to have a function in our ape-like ancestors, or perhaps even further down the line than that, but now they no longer have a function, and so they are just a leftover vestige from our past. However, that's not true either. But even if it was, let's just pretend that it was. The fact that we have something that used to function that no longer does is not a process by which we will gain new functions or structures or behaviors. Let's all remember that not just any change can be evolution. In order for something to be an evolutionary change, it has to add structures, functions, and behaviors that aid in our survival. Losing something that previously existed does not explain where any new things can come from. Something wilting and going away does not explain the creation of new organs or new structures or new functions or new behaviors. So even if the appendix was an example of something that used to be functional but now isn't, that doesn't explain where, say, the functioning intestine came from. Whatever made the appendix go away and stop working will never explain why our liver came into being. Therefore, not an evolutionary change. Here's my metaphor. We want to create the Archduke of Hearts. How do we do that? Well, how about with vestigial cards? Many card games no longer call for the Joker, so it is left in the box unused. It's tossed out of the deck that is being used. It is now vestigial. We don't need it. It's still there, but we keep it in the box. Will this create the Archduke of Hearts? No. So do vestigial structures show evolution? No. Does finding a place where there used to be a branch cause the tree to grow? No. Darwin, fail. But if I may, there's another reason why this is a bad example of bad information being used to try to support evolution. The appendix, for instance. We know the appendix is part of our immune system. It helps protect our native floral bacteria from being harmed during sickness. It might help produce antibodies. And when we are still in the womb, still developing as little babies, it is the first structure that creates red blood cells before our bones and our bone marrow is mature enough to create blood cells. So when our little hearts start pumping a couple weeks after conception, the blood cells being pumped through our body were created in the appendix. So far from being vestigial and a throwback from when it used to be necessary, it is still vital in order to just get to the point where we can be born. When did we know this? Is this a recent discovery? Because my entire life, I have been told, oh, the appendix is an example of a vestigial structure. We no longer need it. It just shows our evolutionary past. But wait! For at least 2,000 years, doctors have puzzled over the function of the thymus gland. Modern physicians came to regard it, like the appendix, as a useless vestigial organ which had lost its original purpose, if indeed it ever had one. In the last few years, however, men have proved that far from being useless, the thymus is really the master gland that regulates the intricate immunity system which protects us against infectious diseases. Recent experiments have led researchers to believe that the appendix tonsils, and adenoids may also figure in the antibody responses. Oh my goodness, look! Recent experiments lead us to believe that the appendix figures in the antibody response. It helps defend us from sickness. When did we find that out? 1966! What? 1966. And this is Reader's Digest. Reader's Digest is not on the cutting edge of new scientific discoveries. So that means by the mid-60s, medical science already knew that the appendix was useful and helpful and functional. It was not vestigial. So we've known this since the 60s. Oh, but wait! There is no longer any justification for regarding the veriform appendix as a vestigial structure. William Strauss, Quarterly Review of Biology, in 1947! 1947. Since the 40s, it has been put in print that the appendix is not a vestigial structure. There is no justification for regarding it as a vestigial structure. And yet since then, in the decades since then, textbooks have been throwing the appendix at us as, well, here's an example of your evolutionary ancestry, proving that evolution's a fact and proving that the human body has evolved from lower animals. Since the 40s. So when I show up here and I say, hey, evolutionists are going to throw a bunch of alleged evidence at you, be suspicious of that evidence. Here's exactly what I'm talking about. Oh, just wait until you see what they did with the alleged ape-to-human ancestors. That is a pile of embarrassment a mile high. Just to give one example, one that for a couple of decades was touted as the evolutionary stage between ape and man, the missing link, was actually a single pig's tooth. True story, Nebraska man, look it up. Thanks for joining us here on the Creation Soapbox. I hope you enjoyed this bit of orange. To see more of what we got, check us out at abitoforange.com. And as always, thanks for watching, and remember, Jesus loves you.